Hello, my name's Isabel and this is the Pilgrims Gallery. It's where I spend a lot of my time when I'm not out on site, working with school groups or helping plan meetings and events. It's where we're going to show you around today. It's part of a really big investment into the Pilgrim Roots region by councils in the area, but also with a huge amount of really enabling funding from the Heritage Lottery Fund. Here we try to challenge some of the stereotypical interpretations of the pilgrims and get people to think about them in a new way for 2020. This is the first board. It really welcomes you to the gallery and sets the context of what we're talking about in here, what the themes we're exploring. Who were these intrepid travellers? Where were they from? Why were they fleeing? And who did they meet? Here we try and challenge some pilgrim myths. There's a bit of a quiz at the bottom, but also pictures from different periods when the pilgrims have been explored through art. Some of the art that's been produced over the centuries has helped encourage and reinforce this impression of the pilgrims that we sometimes have today, which isn't always accurate. And here we have the Pilgrims Trail, our map, and where you can pick up your own copy of the map and our latest newsletter, things like that. This really highlights how central our area was to the Pilgrim story. You have some key characters and some key scenes developing around here, all within a sort of 40-mile radius. Separatism and persecution. Often the names for the pilgrims get a little bit muddled, and it's easy to see why, because they were a lot of things. Some of them were one thing and not another. The pilgrims from our area were largely separatists, so people who wanted to break away from the established church. They didn't think that it could be saved like the Puritans did. They thought the only way to live as God wanted to was to separate completely. And of course, in the 17th century, that was not a popular thing to think, and so they were persecuted. So separatism and persecution go hand in hand, and they're really key parts of our story, and we have a bit of a background about that here. You can see Gainsborough Hall beautifully drawn there. We also talk about the escape to Holland. That's a really key feature. Of course, they didn't leave from here in 1620. They actually left earlier our region and went to Holland first, tried life there. You can see the wonderful pictures of the Pieterskerk and a bit about their life in Holland. The next thing we discuss is the voyage, which was of course a really epic journey, very dangerous, lost a lot of souls once they had arrived actually, but it was a really epic journey taking 66 days. We have information about the ship and a bit of an interactive, which is always popular with visitors who are young or young at heart. You roll the spinner, which tells you how many moves you've got to go. I think I'm on one move there, so I'd slide across. And it's a bit like snakes and ladders, sending you back into a great opportunity to talk to young visitors about the frustrations of relying on luck and being sent back and forth, as of course the pilgrims were. Another important part of the story is of course the Mayflower Compact. People ask me sometimes, why do we remember the pilgrims? Why were they important? They weren't the first people to settle in America, it's true, the first Westerners or Europeans to visit there. However, one of the things that makes them special was they wrote this compact deciding how they would govern themselves, and out of that grew several really important documents, including the United States Constitution and eventually the Bill of Human Rights. They all kind of echo back to the Mayflower Compact, which not everyone signed, but all the men over a certain age who were planning to settle did. and it was a step towards democracy, a step forward from Magna Carta, which of course was another English document of great importance. And it's sometimes suggested that William Brewster, one of our region's famous sons, was the author of the Mayflower Compact, but we don't really know for certain who it was. It seems likely it could have been him. The early years in America is a crucial part of the Mayflower story. They had a real struggle when they arrived, and they would not have survived without the help of the Wampanoag tribe, who were living in Massachusetts already. The Mayflower had been expected to arrive and join the other colony settlements in Virginia. They were unexpectedly on their own. They weren't really prepared, they didn't know how to grow the native crops, and without Squanto particularly, they would not have gotten by. We have another little game here. The Mayflower arrives in Cape Cod. Do you? And then we explore options, lifting the flaps and following along a route to see if you make it in the New World or not. This is a great feature in the gallery, which we're developing a little bit to get more out of at the moment, but you can tap to explore. This is the 1610 John Speed map of Nottinghamshire, which can be overlaid with the modern map, highlighting the Pilgrim Trail and various sites of interest around about. So while we have you here, why not visit Clumber Park, etc. Here, this is one of my absolute favourite boards in the gallery because it really makes you think about modern day pilgrims, what that means, what history is teaching us. It shouldn't necessarily be static, a nice pleasant trip to a museum to find out about the past without relating it to the present and more recent tragedies and issues. Here we really get into these misconceptions about the pilgrims, the way they've been presented through artifacts, you know, the tins and advertising campaigns, and then over here the sort of 2D version of that, how accurate it is. You know, we've got the LNER railway with pilgrims about to board. We also have Nottinghamshire connections, people and places, and you can see that we were kind of spoilt for choice when deciding which locations to feature on our Pilgrim Trail map. We have highlighted the really significant ones on there for you, and then this goes a little bit further. There's places like Ordsall and Worksop which develop the story again. It's a really key region for developing this nonconformist thought. Again, we had to be a little bit political with this one. We are really proud of the fact that our Wampanoag friends wrote these boards. We didn't put words in their mouths. They're telling their own story here and sharing that with us. We're really privileged. So the colonisation perspective comes from them. The pilgrims were primarily very peaceful on arriving for the first 50 years or so, but of course their influence and the European arrival did have very, very negative and far-reaching consequences for the Native American peoples. Fate and folklore is an interesting one because of course the pilgrims were religiously motivated. They weren't particularly superstitious in that sense. However, there were folklore ideas still running around in the country at the time. The pilgrims had a very strong belief in providence, that God would intervene on their behalf in the world and make things happen. So they are often grateful for God's providence and Him, even when bad things happen, testing them but not too far. Standing back to take this in. So on the left we have comparison of Leiden life, and in fact the map of Leiden on the blind there, and then rural Nottinghamshire and the John Speed map again on the right. It's quite an extreme difference from a countryside to a city in those times. The bustle, the different trades and different languages, It's perhaps not surprising that the Pilgrims did eventually leave Leiden, but they did stay there for over a decade, which I think shows some dedication to trying to make it work. In here we have beautiful replica dressing up clothes, all hand sewn and handmade, appropriate sizes for children, and of course here is a mirror so they can admire their splendid apparel. This is another really important board for the Pilgrim Roots region. Why here? Why not just the Pilgrims, but a whole tranche of non-conformist English-speaking religions which developed around here within 30 miles of Retford? And these paddles here help us explore that. So 25 miles away we have Mansfield, George Fox, Quakerism. This is really a provoking board, I think, because although it's based on a lot of work by Adrian Gray, who's done a great amount of research into the area, and not just separatism, but the way nonconformity makes those links. But there's this geography suggestion, the social suggestion, the history suggestion. We don't have a clear, definite one answer, this is why. So it encourages you to kind of make your own mind up. Over here we have the Pilgrim timeline. So this puts the Pilgrims in their context. We have the Nottinghamshire area, what's going on here, then the national England and Scotland perspective, what was going on around the country, and that's contrasted with Holland, which of course features very prominently in the story, and North America. We've all heard about Pilgrim Fathers. We wanted to explore Pilgrim Mothers. So here, this board talks about children, but also the daily necessities of life, the food, the clothes, the women's influence on that. And there's some really interesting comparisons, especially between the role of Wampanoag women and the role of the Pilgrim European women, contrasting their status in their communities. And we also have a little tabletop space where there's dominoes and snap cards featuring pilgrim-related images for children to play with. And this is what you really wanted to see, isn't it? This is where the magic happens. Here we have our wonderful fire crackling and supporting William Brewster in telling his stories. And we have, this is an imagined space, I should say, William Brewster's study, as it would have been perhaps in Scrooby Manor, and very kindly we have been given this beautiful imagined artist's impression of what Scrooby Manor would have been like when the Brewsters lived there. Also we have a Dutch interior for comparison. You can see all the tiles and the different style of life in the city of Leiden at the time. We also have our marvellous story horn, which stops us just having the Pilgrim Father's perspective from William, wherever he's gone. We also hear from Mary Brewster, his wife, Jonathan Brewster, his son, the impressions from a wife and a child who have been taken on this amazing journey. We also hear from a messenger for some national context and the king. So the objects are placed down and then you listen through the horn.
We had to take the king to task. Led by the nose by papists, not we, good Englishmen and true. To profess our own pure Protestant faith we resolved, or lose all in the train.
Thank you for watching this little introduction to the Pilgrims Gallery. There is lots more to see and we hope to see you here soon.